Can you hear me all the way in the back there, Chad? Everybody can hear me back there? Good. Good. Thanks. Cool. Going Mikeless. Don't tell Andy. He doesn't like it when I do low tech options. Hey, we're going to be in the book of Nehemiah. I'm going to tell you that up front because we're going to actually have to flip there today. Or you can use your phone because we don't have a projector today, as you probably noticed. But I was thinking while we were getting started, how cool is it that we have like a space, you know, that we can use? It makes you, I think when things don't go well, you think about what you take for granted, you know? Like, do we even pay for this? Do we pay a little bit or none, right? We pay none for this. So I just think that's so cool. You know, we get to be in this space and have service and meet together. We don't have to worry about the qualms of a building, you know, that can sometimes come along with that. We don't have to meet secretly in people's houses or anything like that. You know, I think that's pretty cool. Plus, I like the Union. Anybody remember when it was built? Oh, right, yes, thank you. Who doesn't remember when it was built? It was like, oh, the Union's been here as long as Abraham Lincoln. Yeah, okay, good. Good, yeah, I was here when it was built, and actually, I had the pleasure of opening, well, shortly after it opened, Espresso, a coffee shop, if you didn't know. That was the first place I ever donned an apron, yeah, and made some caffeinated beverages. It was my first job. I was terrified when I started it. Yeah, I remember there was a guy who used to go here, David Dutton, and he and I were hanging out literally before my first shift started, and I was almost like hyperventilating in his car because I just thought like I've never worked before and I'm afraid I'm going to do something wrong or, you know, I'm going to get fired like the first day because I'm going to accidentally, you know, caffeinate some old lady's beverage or something. But I just didn't have a lot of confidence when I started my job back there in the corner. When you're starting something new, you know, I think you got to learn like the rules of the game. And I just didn't know. So, and also at that time, don't say that I said this because it's kind of my job now. But at that time, they had kind of poor training. So you didn't really know what you were supposed to do, and they just kind of threw you back there. I remember when I first started working there, these are some dumb things that I did that you're like, how could anyone have been that dumb? But I was when I was 19 years old. Yeah, 20. Wow. I used to go in. I thought I'm going to get there early, you know, and like show them that I want to work hard. So I would come like 30 minutes early and just clock right in. Yep. And, like the thought that I was just taking that money didn't even cross my mind. This is like, oh, they know I'm here for a 4-hour shift, so they're going to pay me for 4, but I'm going to work 4.5. That's not the case though. I just took an extra half-hour of money, and they were like, we don't have anything for you to do, so I just stand there for half an hour just in case, just getting paid. And the opposite of what I was like intending to do. On my first day, they had this. Has anyone ever worked with a 3-comp sink before? 3-compartment sink. Sorry. And I don't mean like at your house, but like if you want it. Not that any of you probably have 3-comp sinks at home. But it's like an industrial thing. So who's worked in food service? Yeah, so you're the same people who said you've seen a 3-comp sink, I assume. Yeah, so a 3-comp sink, 3-compartment sink has blue liquid over here. That's the detergent. An empty sink here, or sometimes it's filled up with just water. Although it really shouldn't be. It should be empty. And then red liquid here. The Stove Center also has one in the back. So if you said you haven't seen one, but you've been back in the kitchen or the stove, they have one. Red liquid here. They usually come out of hose. So I'd never seen one of those before, and since I was new, I didn't know how to make any drinks. They were like, you should be on dishes. You know, help us out with that. We make a lot of blended beverages, as I'm sure you've consumed some from Espresso before. And so they were like, if you wouldn't mind just manning the 3-comp sink. And I said, sure. They're like, yep, just make sure it goes through each, you know, and you're good to go. So they would start handing me pitchers because they're making them so fast. They'd blend a beverage, pour it, and then hand it. And I just assumed that like the chemical liquid stuff was magic. So I was like just set it to the side. I did that for like 40 pitchers, I think. And eventually someone was like, these are filthy. Also, like, I mean, at that time, literally, they were probably handing people like sanitizer fluid in there because people thought they were clean. Someone finally was like, why is there whipped cream floating in the sanitizer? You know, they should be washed. Do you know you have to wash the dishes? You have to wash them. So I realized my mistake. But eventually I learned the rules of the game, and I ended up being okay. In fact, I spent the next 3 years of my life as a barista, so everything ended up okay, and I can wash dishes pretty well now. Pretty thoroughly, I'd like to say. with no whipped cream and the sanitizer. This is total side note, but I just heard from a supervisor. I was sharing a story with a supervisor this last week, and they told me, they work in dining services, that once they told a student to mop the floor, and the student looked at like a mop bucket like they've never seen it before. And he was like, just go out there, mop around with that. And he said that he looked out at a while, and the student had the mop in the mop bucket, just pushing the bucket on the floor. So, true story apparently, so it could have been worse. But I don't know how that happens. But anyways, so yeah, I say all that to say, one, I love the Union. I'm glad we're here because I have lots of memories here. Two, we're going to talk a little bit about like starting things. When you're like starting something new and how you kind of have to learn the ropes of the game and what that looks like. We've been in the book of Nehemiah, this summer, and we're going to continue in that. If you're not familiar or you missed out last week, Nehemiah, he's the wall builder, right? So that's what we know about him. Is he helped people build the wall around Jerusalem. Andy talked a little bit last week and kind of filled us in that walls aren't just like an aesthetic cool thing or just in case of a flood, but it's like, best offense is a good defense. It was, I hear that's a sports term, it was a really important thing to have a big fortified wall around your city. It was like make or break for a city. And at this time, that you may remember, right, so actually I'm reading Deuteronomy right now. It's a really cool book, but sometimes it's a little tough to read too. But it's basically the law laid out, what the Israelites were supposed to follow at that time. At the end of Deuteronomy, there's like this sort of blessing and curse. If you haven't read it before, basically, well, one, you should. It's a pretty interesting book, and it's like what the rest of the Old Testament is founded on, is this law within Deuteronomy. And at the end, there's like blessing and curse section, and basically they say, hey, if you do this law, things will go well for you. You'll be fine. You'll prosper. You'll take the land. You'll have the land. You'll never leave it. But if you don't keep the law, you're going to be shipped out. Right? You're going to be exiled, war is going to come upon you, it's going to break down your nation, because you're supposed to be the people that demonstrate what I'm like to the world. And if you stop doing that by keeping the law, I'm going to get you out of the land. You're not going to be there anymore. With another kind of but under the but on the but, if you turn back, I'll bring you back. Okay, so where we're at in Nehemiah is they didn't follow the law, they got shipped out, and now we're on that sort of sub-but under the but, where they're following and now they're coming back. Okay, but 3, the city that they're coming back to has no wall, and you may have been here last week and noticed when they told Nehemiah the city had no wall, he's not there in Jerusalem yet. He's still working for the king as a cupbearer, and he's pretty torn up about that. He's like, there's no way the city will stand unless we have a wall. This needs to be fixed, right? The town needs to be fixed. He's broken about. We talked about burden last week. We're all caught up, okay? But something to take note of this summer. So this is for the whole summer. This is not a point for this week. This is a point for this is summer point. Okay, so you should remember this. Okay, I don't mean like, oh, you can write it down. I don't have a very wordy way to say it, but we'll get to it. Okay, is that the cool thing about reading don't write yet. The cool thing about reading a story in the Old Testament is it's not like reading a letter from Paul. Right, where if you read a letter in the New Testament or a teaching from Jesus, he's like, hey, here's some things you should know about how to live your life, and then you can kind of take that and go with it, or it's a theological work. When you read an Old Testament story like this, you're reading a story, right? So it can be easy to be like, cool story, I memorized the facts, I could play another round of Bible trivia and do a little better than I did last time, but like, what's this doing for my life? And I think when we look at stories like this, it's still God working with people, right? Sort of accomplishing his purposes through his people. And that is just as applicable for us as it is for that time. So whenever you're looking, whether you're reading at home or studying with a friend or here at church, when we're looking at sort of an Old Testament story, a good way to say is to look at it as to what can we learn about God, what can we learn about people, what can we learn about how he uses them. So that's what I want you to be thinking about throughout Nehemiah, and when we go over it this summer. Andy introduced this idea that it's sort of like rebuilding what's been broken, right? So that's kind of the subheading of Nehemiah for us. Nehemiah this summer, rebuilding what's been broken, and that's what Nehemiah is doing. He's partnering with God to go do God's work and rebuild something that was broken. And the reason why that's important is because we're kind of called to do the same thing. So each of us, whether if you're a believer. We have a call in our life to partner with God to build, to be builders or rebuilders of things that are broken. So I think that there are some of these instances where every Christian's called to it. So for example, just the Great Commission, right? We're all called to go out and make disciples and teach people what Jesus taught and bring the gospel to folks. We're called to that, each one of you. Okay, we're all called to be ambassadors for Christ, to speak as God would speak, to be ambassadors for reconciliation, specifically. To be putting the message out there that God has sent His Son to bring people back to Him. We're called to share that. Okay, everybody. So that I think falls under that heading of what we're supposed to be rebuilding. Then I think there's things that are specific just to New Life. You're here at this church, and we have a specific mission and purpose, and you're here for a reason. Gathering college students from OSU, equipping them to be able to be sent out as missionaries. That's sort of our mission. You're here. I don't think it's a coincidence. So that's a mission we have together, to rebuild some things that have been broken around us. And then I think there'll be things that are specific to you, or you and your spouse. That maybe is a mission that's just what you have to live out. And it might be a specific thing that God's called you to, or it may just be where you work, or where you have class, or whatever the case is. But you might have a mission too, to rebuild what's been broken. And either way, I think there's things we can glean, I like that word, from the story of Nehemiah that we could apply to those. Whether it's our universal Christian mission, whether it's New Life specific stuff, or wherever you happen to land in a home church one day, or whether it's your life. And so this summer, I want you to be thinking about that. Okay, what can we take from this that we could apply to the work that God's called us to do? Okay, so now you can write that down. Okay, so but every story starts somewhere, right? And I mentioned that we're going to be talking a little bit about beginnings. So Nehemiah wasn't always a wall builder. He wasn't always leading a big group of people to do some awesome thing led by God. He was once just a cupbearer to the king, exiled and sent to another country. Not much of a person of significance. No one that I think would have pointed at him and said, that's going to be the guy that leads the charge. He's going to get the wall rebuilt and become this sort of almost governor, really, of the land. That wasn't a thought, but every story kind of has to start somewhere. Andy talked last week about the idea of burden, and that was something that was on his heart. I'm not going to talk about that as much this week, but I don't want to leave that behind also. That we need that. We need some kind of burden to be driven to change the world around us, right? So, but let's look at Nehemiah chapter 2. So you can open it up on your Bible or flip there. I'm going to start technically at the very last part of chapter 1, which says, at that time I was a cupbearer to the king. I'm going to start there, okay, just so you know, and then we'll move forward. Okay, we're going to just look at 8 verses. Now I'm going to read it out loud to you. And if you have a buddy that doesn't have a Bible open or on the app, maybe you can share. Okay, it says, at that time I was a cupbearer to the king. That's Nehemiah speaking. In the month of Nisan, in the 20th year of King Artaxerxes, the king was about to be served wine. And I took the wine and gave it to the king. Since I had never seemed sad in his presence, the king asked me, why do you seem sad? Since you aren't sick, you must have a broken heart. Now I was very afraid and replied, may the king live forever. Why shouldn't I seem sad when the city, the place of my family's graves, is in ruins and its gates destroyed by fire? The king asked, what is it that you need? I prayed to the God of heaven and replied, if it pleases the king, and if your servant has found favor with you, please send me to Judah, to the city of my family's graves, so that I may rebuild it. With the queen sitting beside him, the king asked me, how long will you be away, and when will you return? So it pleased the king to send me. And I told him how long I would be gone. And I also said to him, if it pleases the king, may letters be given me addressed to the governors of the province beyond the river to allow me to travel to Judah. May the king also issue a letter to Asaph, the keeper of the king's forest, directing him to supply me with timber for the beams of the temple fortress's gates, for the city wall, and for the house in which I will live. And the king gave me all that I asked for the gracious power of God was with me. Cool. Awesome. Nehemiah knows how to ask for stuff. Slow on that first one, but then bam, he just opened the floodgates. So yeah, okay, cool. So this is where we see it, okay? This chapter 2 is right here. This is the transformation where Nehemiah was just a guy that was broken for a cause. He was broken to see God's city, his purposes be rebuilt. And now we have Nehemiah, the person who leads the charge to make this happen, involved in the story that God's telling through his life. Okay, this is the pivot point. This is where things get started. And so I thought it would be nice to maybe, I thought of a couple things in here that we could pull out and think through, okay, when we're trying to get started on joining God in his work, in his rebuilding, redeeming, reconciling work, what are some ways that we can get started, I guess, to do that, right? So I think in many ways, hopefully you all feel like that's a work that you're already a part of, but maybe not to the extent where you're thinking, I'm all in, or my life really looks like a missionary every day. I feel totally bought into the purpose of God. I'm thinking about that every day. That may not be you. I don't think it's me all the time. Or maybe even most of the time. But I think that there are 3 things in here that we could really pull out to think through that would help us get started. Yeah. Okay? So here they are. Number 1, and this is where you can write notes if you'd so like to do. And you don't have to write the notes that I gave you. I left it open for you. Yep, to be creative. So number 1, recognize your position. Recognize your position. Andy talked a little bit about this last week. But in that last part of chapter 1, right, he says, at that time I was cupbearer to the king. Andy explained what this meant last week. If you missed it, basically, the cupbearer is what it sounds like. He bears the cup. Yep, so he brings the drink to the king, presents it to him. Oftentimes he's supposed to drink first to make sure nothing's poisoned or anything. But he has access, okay? Access to the king for sure. Not necessarily a trust like a top advisor, not like a warlord or anything like that, but there, he has an ear to the king at the very least, okay? And there's some reason to believe that it may have not have been an everyday thing. I think I read that kings, just if you're nerdy and interested in this, kings had lots of cupbearers, so they were kind of like in shifts, like, oh, it's your month, or whatever, so hope this isn't the assassination month, So anyways, either way, he was a cupbearer, he kind of had the ear to the king, but this is what he recognized, like, he knew that position put him in a place to make something happen, right? And I think something that is true in general for your life and mine is that God puts specific people into specific positions to accomplish specific purposes. Okay? So I think that's something you can kind of take to the bank from this. This is true in all cases, in all situations. God doesn't say like, oh wow, Morgan got a job at Home Depot, I really meant for him to be at Lowe's. Shucks. That doesn't happen. Okay? So he knows where he wants you to be. Okay? You're here for a reason. You're in this body, in this church for a reason. You're in the major you're in for a reason. I believe, that God wants to use those things. So God, I believe, throughout the whole Bible and just the history of Christianity in general, he puts specific people into specific positions for specific purposes. Esther, I don't know if you're familiar with the story of Queen Esther, but that is it's just a baller book of the Bible. So I highly recommend you check it out. Bless you. But I think that's a good example too. And if you aren't familiar, basically similar to how Nehemiah became the cupbearer, but not similar, she became the queen. Actually not similar at all. It's a very different application process, very different. So I would not want to be the cupbearer if they're the same. But she became the queen and recognized that when there was this plot to destroy basically all Jewish people, she was in a position to save them, even though it was a big risk for her. And when she was trying to sort out whether she should or should not say something or use her position for God's purposes, her uncle, I think, Mordecai, such a good name, was said, like, who knows that you weren't put in the kingdom for such a time as this? Yeah, it's like the coolest verse, I think. And then if anyone ever writes its commentary on Esther, that verse is always on the front cover. Such a time as this. Yeah. But that's what he was basically saying. Like, how do you not know that God put you in this specific position to accomplish this specific purpose? So I would encourage you to think about the positions that you're in. And you may think like, well, Caleb, I'm not like, I don't know, like the shoe shiner for President Obama, so I don't know that this is necessarily applicable. Or I'm not in these same kind of positions. Nothing sticks out to me like, oh, I happen to sit next to the king every day. Well, I hadn't thought about using that. I forgot. You may think like, I don't know if that really doesn't contrast. But I'd say no matter what your position is, I think you can do stuff. Case in point, Bertha Newman. Yep. Anybody know her? No, you don't. She's my great-grandma. Yeah, she's no longer with us, so if you knew her, I'd really be concerned. But she was my great-grandma, and I was fortunate enough. I've talked about her before, and I'm probably going to tell some of the same stories, but as long as I'm around, you're going to hear about my Grandma Bert and my Grandma Papa Lou, but that'll be another time. But my Grandma Bert, she lived on Rocky Fork Road in Portsmouth, Ohio, right outside of Shawnee Forest. Shawnee State Forest. Anyone ever been down there? Thanks. Yeah, it's a beautiful part of the state. And she grew up right there. She was born, grew up, and raised, and spent 92 years there. Yep, on Rocky Fork Road. Rocky Fork is this tiny little road, and it's really a community. People don't say like, oh, I live in, whatever the town is. They say I live on Rocky Fork. So there's about maybe, 30, 40 homes out there total, and they all go to like 1 or 2 churches. She spent her whole life out there, and that, I think if there's anybody that you would think like not really a flashy position, She was born and lived her whole life in the middle of nowhere, a place none of you have ever heard of, Rocky Fork, But she taught Sunday school for 7 decades, for one, okay? So it's like, oh, I taught your great-grandma, that kind of stuff is happening, right? And I don't typically look forward to funerals. In any case, I didn't look forward to hers, although I knew she was ready to get out of there, just to be honest with you. But I have never experienced as such of a cool, I'm going to say cool funeral than my great-grandma. I don't mean like it was hip or anything, because she was 90. So, but there were so many people there with stories about how their life wouldn't be what their life is if it weren't for her, So many people who said like, oh, it was in her class that like I gave my life to Jesus. It was through that. So many people that their parents, that was the case. Even the minister there, and if I probably shared this before, but even the minister there said, I wouldn't be a believer if it weren't for Bert Newman, And he'd grown up in that church, so I mean, she's like, and I know you'd think it's because she taught me in Sunday school, but I don't even mean that. Said, basically, and then he told the story about how when his grandma came to Rocky Fork, she was not a believer and had no interest in it. And my great-grandma would just bake some food, take it to her house, and if it's my great-grandma, she's probably just telling her about how she's going to be going to church the next week, is what I would guess. But either way, like, invested in this person's life, and just, and my grandma became a believer, and then that's how she raised her kids, and that's how I was raised, to be into that faith and put up against it. And eventually, I gave my heart to it as well. But it's generations of impact. And so I think my great-grandma, she recognized the position that she was in, and it wasn't one that people would dream about. Like, oh, I hope to be in this small country town and spend my whole life there, never see another country or a big city, never really meet a person of influence or anybody famous, or never aspire to that. But she spent her life leveraging the positions that she had and changed families, generations of people. And he has kids, and they all have kids, and I don't know that they'll always be faithful, but I'm here, too. So I just think it doesn't so much matter what the position is. It doesn't matter if it's a part-time job or the back row of your classroom or whatever, or raising kiddos or whatever the case is. Like, it's a position God gave you to leverage. Cool. So I want you to think about what the positions are in your life and how you may be able to leverage them. Everybody got that? Good. Okay. That's a good way to get started, to think through that. Okay, I think Nehemiah did that. Second thing, here it is. Number 2, look for moments to leap. Yep. Look for moments to leap. Yeah, so it is a moment, really. I mean, we read 9 verses, but it's really a moment that changes things. And it's right there when he says, I seemed sad. I've never seemed sad before in his presence. And the king asked me in verse 2, why do you seem sad? Since you aren't sick, you must have a broken heart. He says, I was very afraid. I love that. There's a couple wording in here Nehemiah puts in. I just love how honest he is. I was very afraid, and he replied, may the king live forever. Why shouldn't I seem sad? And he kind of took the leap and jumped for it, right? So if you don't know this, there's a lot on the line when you speak to the king. Okay. Number 1, I've read a couple commentaries that said you really shouldn't even really ever seem sad or anything but thrilled and honored to be in the presence of the king. If you seem gloomy and it gets him gloomy, it could get you murdered. So you need to be happy to be there. And then in general, also, you should definitely not talk about the fact that your town, which he oversees, is not in the shape that you want it to be in, but it's the shape that he decreed that it should be in. So it could easily be seen as a treason type comment, and you're just out of there. Okay, and this is not an advisor; he's a cupbearer. shouldn't really be speaking out of turn or speaking his opinion in general. So it's certainly a risk for him to take that step. If you don't believe me, I mean, he said, I was very afraid and replied. So he was pretty terrified to do it, okay? But he recognized, this is a shot, right? This is my shot. So he said, that's right. So it's, and he had been burdened over the state of the city for quite some time. If you don't know, he heard this news in chapter 1 about the wall in the month of Kislev, and then this was happening in the month of Nisan. So you see the time pass. It's 4 months. 4 months, right? Yeah. So it's been 4 months, and he's been burdened over this, and then realized when this happened, he realized this is it. This is the time. So he was afraid, but he took the leap and said something. I think moments like this happen to us all the time, right? I think if you're a believer and you have even an ounce of intention, I assume you've probably been in a situation before where you thought, I should say something right here. Like your friend says something, a coworker says something, and just the thought pops in your mind, and I should say this, or I should do this, or I should jump. And maybe it's a big decision in life, and it's not maybe a moment that's presented to you, but you kind of know this is the time to take this plunge and follow after what I think God's calling me to do. Either way, you know that these moments happen a lot, and that God gives them to us to kind of jump. I had a Sunday school teacher whom I love. Okay, but I don't know if you've been through this before, but if you were raised in church, do you sometimes think back on things you were taught and think like, I believed that my whole life, and I think she shouldn't have said it that way. Or, I think that's not true. Or, I don't think that's what God's like at all, now that I actually read the Bible. This is one of those situations where she was teaching us, and she taught us this thing, and she said, fear and faith can never coexist. Now, we were made to kind of memorize that, right? And I get it, because there's lots of places where Jesus says, like, oh, you have little faith, don't fear, So I think there is some truth to the fact that we shouldn't be afraid of things, we should trust in God. But I look at this moment in Nehemiah, and it's probably one of his most terrifying moments of his life, and I'd say maybe his most faithful as well. So I think having the reaction when those moments come along, I should say something to this person. They just brought it up, I should say something. Or a teacher asks a question in class, and that if you were to really give your totally honest answer, it would involve something about your faith or something that might even contradict what was just said. And you're terrified. Like something in you just doesn't want to do it, right? And I think that's okay. It's okay to be afraid to do those things, and I think that sometimes doing it, even in spite of fear, is sort of like even more faith, I think. So I just think they can. But I think one has to win out. And I think that's probably the spirit of what she would say. At least that's how I'm rewriting her in my mind. Yeah. Okay, so these moments come in, and I think they're time for us to kind of jump on. So I have a friend who used to be at New Life, and you guys know I care a lot about student employment. That's like my other side gig. And he used to be a student employee too, not at Espresso. He worked for the libraries, did security. Yeah. And he said that there was this one situation where there's a coworker, and lots of people really didn't like the supervisor over there. Yeah. And this one specific coworker always had it out with the supervisor. They were always fighting. So she was talking about how she was just getting ready to tell him off, right? And talking about, I don't know how to approach him, but I'm just going to tell him he can't treat me like this anymore. And my friend had just been memorizing a Bible study verse, sort of about just respecting other people, sort of, and being able to put yourself in their shoes. It was sort of on managing conflict. So, she's talking about this, and he just, he's kind of like, oh, I don't know if I should, I don't want to be preachy, I don't want to sound preachy. Tell her, you're not doing it right. But he decided to take the leap, and he said, I've been studying this passage in Scripture, I'm a Christian, and it's made me think about, how we should handle conflict and things. And he basically, took something that he was learning, and he didn't, quote it to her. He was like, in Ephesians 2, verse 14 says, he just said, it's been making me think about how sometimes I think it's better just to be honest and to put yourself in someone else's shoes. But he connected it back to the passage on purpose, to be able to say this isn't just me being a smart, good people person, but I'm basing this on something that I'm learning from God's Word. And he told her, and this is kind of the leap part for him too, he said, why don't, if you decide to talk to him, I'm making my rounds this afternoon and doing the security thing up the tower. He said, I'll pray for you while I'm doing it. She said, thanks. And they had the conversation, and it went really well, and she thanked him for the advice and said that it helped. And then a week later, she came to him and she said, I've been trying out that thing you told me from the Bible with my boyfriend. And like, our relationship's already like 5 times better, And he was like, yeah, that's the Bible for you, It's full of relevant truth for your everyday life. And then, some time passed, and he kind of felt like, I think I should get her a Bible. So he was at Barnes & Noble, he picked her one up, and then when he gave it to her, she had just, she kind of got a little emotional and told him, like, I just started thinking, like, I was helping my boyfriend clean out his room, and I found one that he had, and I started reading a little bit, and I just started thinking, I think I need to start reading this thing, and then today, here you have one for me. But it's just those little moments, I think, of being able to leap, and you just never know what God's doing on the other side of that stuff. And especially if the Spirit of God in you is putting a little tugging in you, I think there's a reason for that. You just don't know what's being done on that other side. So you got to look for those moments. Here's some other things I can tell you too. I've never asked for an opportunity to speak. I've never had a time where I said, God, could you show me this week, like, if there's a way you want me to talk to someone, or a moment like this to lead? There's never been a time I've ever asked for one and not found one. Never once. Honestly. I mean, if I'm really looking and really seeking it, I think they're there, right? Jesus, if you remember the passage, Jesus said, hey, the harvest, is plentiful, workers are few. So there's work out there to be done. I think we just got to look for it. But right now, everybody's taking time off. You know what I mean? So I think it's just being intentional. I think that's me sometimes too. I'm just kind of off the clock at that time. I'm a worker, but just maybe not working all the time. But I would encourage us to remember that there are opportunities out there for us to jump, to take a leap. And I think that's why I want to say that look for moments specifically, because I think we've got to be seeking them out too. I think this can look like a lot of things, inviting someone out. We've seen lots of cool baptism services where someone gets baptized and they invite like a bunch of their pals. I think that's always a little risky, but I think it's a cool thing to do. Sharing out in class is something that I've struggled with a lot, honestly, especially in classes that are geared towards a different kind of ideology. But I think it's a really good way to take a leap, and you just never know who else in the class is kind of wondering the same things. There have been lots of times where I've shared something I've been kind of scared to share, but people have come up afterward and said, like, I think that was really helpful, and we get to talk one-on-one about it. So I don't know what that leap looks like for you. Maybe it's tomorrow, someone at work or someone wherever you're at says, hey, well, how'd your weekend go? What'd you do? And how you sometimes just leave out church, or you fly by it really fast. Like, maybe you share what it was, and I'm not going to say how good the teaching was, but something that stuck with you about it. So yeah, I mean, you know what these look like. I don't have to give you a 1,000 things, but I do want to make the point that these moments like this, you just never know what can happen in a moment. Nehemiah is a great example. Like, he was a cupbearer, and now he's leading the charge to rebuild this wall for an entire city and nation, to protect the temple where God's presence was. He was just a cupbearer, and he just took a moment, and his life was changed, and it affected generations and a nation, and really the rest of the storyline of the Bible. Right? So, and I wonder how many people out there could trace their walk with Christ back to a moment where someone just took a little risk, that maybe felt uncomfortable, but you don't know. So these aren't trivial. Yeah. So look for these moments. Okay, that's another good thing to do to get started. Okay, third one, last one. Ready? Acknowledge our dependence on God. Point 3. Acknowledge our dependence on God. So looking at verse 4, again, 4 and 5, this is, he's very afraid, but he spoke out and he said, this is why I'm upset, right? Because my city's in ruins, and the place of my family's graves are destroyed by fire. And the king said, what is it that you need? And this is another scary moment, right? And I love this. He says, I don't know how your version phrases it, but mine says, what is it that you need? And Nehemiah says, I prayed to the God of heaven and replied. If it pleases the king, and if your servant has found favor, and then he makes his first ask. But I prayed to the God of heaven and replied. I just like this because it's in a breath. You know what I mean? It wasn't like, what is it that you need? And he said, give me a week and I'll get back with you. Let me pray on it. But it's like right there, he just said, like, no one could see it, but he knew, like, and it was a big enough importance thing to him that he wrote it in the story. Like, at that moment, I remember I prayed to the God of heaven, and I replied. I think this may look like moments for us, maybe in those moments of just acknowledging, but I think a truer heart of what's happening here is that Nehemiah is acknowledging his desperate need for God to do something. Right? He can't make this happen on his own. He can't turn the king's heart, but he acknowledges that at the same time God can. So it kind of acknowledges our need, right? I can't, but at the same time his power, he can. I love that God of heaven, just kind of remembering, like, this king may own like vast swaths of land and could assassinate me in a heartbeat at a command, but my God's the God of heaven, a little bit bigger than what you got going on around here in your kingdom. So it's just that acknowledgement of, I can't, but you can. I think this is even truer for us. We've got the Spirit of God in us as believers. So this kind of goes back to that idea that I got to chat with you about a month ago or so, right? That we just acknowledge how we need him. We can't do things on our own, right? But we're his to serve. There's this mid-breath trust in God. But don't forget, it was built on 4 months of praying and fasting too, about this specific situation. So it was built on that history of trusting God too. So I think they can be moments like that for us, but either way, I would say this third one is probably the most important when we set out to join like a work that God's doing. It's just remembering that really we don't really have the power to change someone's life, to change a campus, or to end some kind of social injustice. That's not something you can do on your own, period. But he definitely can. So just acknowledging that our God is the God of heaven that can get that stuff done. And it doesn't have to be a weight on your shoulders. Okay, so if you're a follower of Christ, right, if you're a believer, I guarantee you that he has a purpose for you to serve this sort of rebuilding mission of his. It's not supposed to be your story to be a normal, just average American life. Okay? Don't forget that. You're not called, he didn't put his Spirit in you to just coast, and to build your career and retire. Awesome. Yeah. But he's equipped us, each one of us, not to focus on our agenda, but to be part of his work. And that doesn't start 10 years from now. That should start now. That should have started, right? But it's a journey we're in it together, but I think these are 3 things we learned from Nehemiah that would help us out in that, okay? So I would encourage you to think about the positions that you're in. What are they? How can you use them? I would encourage you to ask God this week to give you one of those moments that like, I'm supposed to say something right here, or I'm supposed to do something, or take this risk. I'm going to promise you, if you ask for it and look for it, it's going to happen. I'm going to promise you. Yeah. Tell me if I'm wrong next week. And then lastly, just throughout the process, acknowledging our dependence on God, seeking him constantly, whatever the burden is that is on our heart, asking about that. And if like, I just don't feel that burden, then talk to him about that too. I'm there a lot, but that's something he wants to work in us too. Okay, cool. That's what I got from chapter 2. We're going to pray real quick, and then have one last song, and we'll probably be done. All right. God, thanks for your word and for this group together. God, thanks that even if it's like 1,000,000 degrees in here and we don't have a projector, God, that you provide for us and give us a space to be here and to meet together and hear from your word. Father, I would ask that you would put that burden in our hearts to remember that you've called us to a mission that's important, God. There's people all around that don't know you. There's injustices in our own community and in the world. There's relationships that are broken. And you've called us to be a part of your bringing in your kingdom. So help us just to get started in that, God, or continue on. And be with us this week. Help keep us faithful to you. In Jesus' name.